So today we're making a brand new tier list, ranking every meta unit in Universal Tower Defense X as of the most recent Festival Finale Dragon Ball update. Keep in mind the rankings in this video are just my own opinion, but I still hope you guys found the video helpful. If you do, maybe if you like or subscribe, I would really appreciate it because I just got back into making UTD content. But anyways, let's get into it. Alright, hello guys, let's make a new tier list for UTD today. I'm using the same categories as my last tier list video. We have Meta Overall, Hill Hybrid, Support, Good, and Farms. Now we have 5 different new units from the update today. And then we have just a bunch of units we've already talked about before. So starting off with the brand new units, we have Mualani and Hu Tao first up from the Flames and Waves event. I do already have an entire showcase video on these two units, so I won't go into too much detail here. But Mualani is the better one of the two. He has this new effect called Soaked, which is going to slow down enemies by 50% and make them take a little bit more damage from everything. And then she also has good DPS, so Mualani going into support and meta overall. And then Hu Tao just kind of good for DPS, she doesn't have any supporting value. Pretty much she builds up stacks on enemies and then blows up those stacks, and it does pretty good crowd control damage, but I don't know, both of these units are ground, so no hybrid units out of these two. And then Hu Tao is full AoE and pretty good for damage. Now aside from the Genshin Impact characters, this was mostly a Dragon Ball update. So next up we have Perfect Cell here. I think Perfect Cell Maximum, I don't know, some form of cell that we got this update, the Boundless one. So this guy has multiple different modes from an active ability, we'll talk about those first. So we have the normal one, where he does more damage to normal enemies in exchange for losing damage to, like, different kinds of enemies. And we have his other form, which is the air form. He's going to become hybrid at the cost of 25% of his range, so he has less range, but he is hybrid. Then we have the hyper armor form, where he does more damage to enemies with hyper armor. And then finally the boss form, which is 150% more damage to bosses in exchange for 40% less damage to other enemies. So those are like his 4 different modes out of the way. You get access to those on placement, so you can use him however you want to. Otherwise though, I think this guy is really strong, definitely going into meta overall. Pretty much he's going to like sacrifice different Dragon Ball units and gain different buffs by them. Kind of random though I think, on which buffs he gains depending on who you sacrifice. But he self-buffs his damage by quite a bit, up to like 150%, and then we have follow-up attacks or whatever. Pretty strong raw damage already. And then he does have a meter that he builds up with Perfection Charge, where once you max it out, he gets a random effect out of 3, one of which he spawns in a bunch of clones, pretty much a burst of damage. Then he has a full AoE follow-up attack, or a 40% slow to all enemies in range, so pretty good effects all around. And he's also going to self-buff himself even more by reducing his SPA. The supporting value from the slow, not enough to make me put him in support tier, but he is pretty good. Of course he does have the hybrid form, so putting him in meta heal / hybrid. Then he has one more passive, which is pretty important for how to use him. So pretty much Gohan and Perfect Cell are going to have like linked SPA. It's going to be the average of their SPA, so... And then when Perfect Cell gets stunned, he's actually going to transfer the stun onto Beast Gohan instead. And Beast Gohan wants to get stunned. We'll talk about that in a second here because he's coming up for the tier list ranking. But overall, I mean, good synergy between the two, you want to use them together. As for where I think it actually puts them in the current meta, I do think there are some units still better than them. We'll talk about that later. But overall, they are really strong, and I could be wrong, they could be the best units in the game. But yeah, Perfect Cell, really good. Moving on to Gohan. Beast Gohan, this is, in my opinion, probably the best unit of the update, so definitely going into meta overall. And he is actually a hill unit, so going into meta hill. So if we talk about exactly what this guy does, I already mentioned you want to pair him with Cell. But he's also going to gain damage depending on like the total damage of units in his range. So pretty much just have strong units in his range, and he will buff himself by quite a bit. And then whenever he gets stunned or debuffed, he also buffs himself even more. So that's kind of where the like stunning from Cell comes in and helps him out. And then when his damage is higher than the enemy's health, he's actually going to do his leftover damage to surrounding enemies. So pretty good. We've never seen that before, I don't think. Usually whenever an enemy dies, it just kind of dies and the damage was wasted, you know? And I think whenever that procs, he's also going to buff his crit damage, so pretty good. And then this passive is where the stun from Perfect Cell really matters here. So whenever there's a debuff on any unit or he gets stunned, he's going to buff his damage by 150%, and also buff his hyper armor damage a little bit. And for every base stock lost, you also gain 75% damage, so I think if you pair him with like Goku for example, Goku's automatically going to reduce your base stocks to 1. So that could be a combo to kind of buff him by 150% damage. I'm not sure how you're supposed to reach 300, because you know if you lose more than 2 stocks you die. And finally we have his active ability Super Blue Beam, which is a 400% damage nuke to every enemy on the map, and it will always crit. So it's guaranteed to crit, don't need to build crit rate for the nuke. And that is everything that Beast Gohan has. I do think he's meta overall, meta hill / hybrid. Probably not the top one in the game though, I think probably number 2 or 3. We'll talk about this later. I do still think there's some units that kind of compete for number 1 and 2 spot. Then we have the Secret Form of Cell from the World Raid. This is like the Evil Demon Form of Cell or something. I don't know, I'm not a Dragon Ball fan. But this one's actually surprisingly not that bad for like a random secret unit. Pretty much he has a passive where he's going to, on placement, have like a full AoE 400% damage attack. And if you sell him within a certain amount of time, he's also going to like do that nuke scaling off his previous placement's damage. So if you sell him on max upgrade and replace him, he'll do 400% of the max upgrade damage as like a little full AoE nuke. So pretty good. I'm not sure if the meta with him is like spam replacing him over and over, I don't know. But I'd say he's going into meta overall. He's definitely just a strong unit for damage. And another passive he has is pretty good for like anti-stun. He's going to attack even while stunned, but just do a little bit less damage. And then when he gets debuffed or stunned, he also is going to do more damage, so like, I don't know, that kind of cancels out. He pretty much attacks more than his full damage when stunned. And he's also going to gain stun immunity, so yeah, I don't know, whenever he gets stunned, he just kind of gets crazy buffed. And then when you have the Boundless Form of Cell in his range, they're both going to get a pretty huge buff to damage SPA and range. So a pretty good combo overall running these 3. I don't think these are the top 3 units in the entire game though, and I want to actually kind of talk about that while we're here, get these out of the way. Oh shoot, one more passive for Cell Maximum by the way, before I forget. He doesn't attack based on enemies being in his range, he always attacks, kind of like the duo units in like AV and Anime Crusaders. This guy's always attacking, and he's going to cycle between different attacks, so he's going to have one that like increases the damage enemies take from all sources, pretty good buff. We have Electrified, we have Ionized, which I think I've cut off in my screenshot, sorry. But overall, yeah, very good unit, very solid damage. I think he's just kind of in the middle of meta overall. He's not like crazy, but pairs well with the 2 meta units here anyway. But talking about the top 3, I want to give this a little bit of time in the video to just kind of mention why I don't think these guys are the top 2 units in the game. I could be completely wrong, take this with a grain of salt please. Disclaimer, this is like right after the update dropped, so maybe I just don't know how to build these units yet, or like the combos, their full potential. You know, I'm sure there's more we'll find out about Gohan and Cell and all the new units in like a couple days or so. So this tier list, of course, could be wrong. Please do not be evil in the comments. Just take it with a grain of salt, okay? The top 1 and 2, I think, belong to Gogeta and Vegito still. Because Gogeta with the leader buff, if we count that for his meta overall value, he pretty much is a must-have to like every team at the moment. You need to bring him to buff your Dragon Ball units because the buff is crazy. On top of that, he is hybrid on placement and pretty cheap. He's a strong hybrid unit with good damage. And then he is also a pretty good support, even if we don't count his like leader buff in this category. We just count his like 30% follow-up attack buff to any unit that performs a follow-up attack, whatever. He is a pretty good support as well. So I think Gogeta just overall so like versatile on the Dragon Ball teams right now, so like mandatory for just buffing your units. I think he's kind of the top 1 in the entire game right now. And then Vegito Blue, if I'm not wrong, still has better damage than these 2 right here. Like, not both the units combined. These 2 units combined probably outdamage him, surely, because it's 2 units, right? But for overall value, for like bringing 1 unit on your team, I think it's still more valuable to just bring this guy, because he does so much damage, he does so much like follow-up attack, anti-stun, whatever. He does a lot. Okay, this guy just does so much. He even has some supporting value with like whenever he attacks the same unit 3, or same enemy 3 times, he's going to build up like, he take 30% more damage or something. I don't know, a lot to talk about. I don't want to get into all the detail of this unit, we've already talked about him before, you can always check out my old tier list video. But overall, I do think the top 1 and 2 still belong to these 2 units right here, hopefully that is understandable, and you are not too mad at me in the comments. Now for everyone else on the tier list here, these are units we've already talked about before, you can of course always check my other tier list video, you know. So, sorry, but I'm probably going to speedrun through these. If you wanted to hear the explanations and you're kind of mad that I don't explain these guys, let me know in the comments and I'll start explaining them better. But I think most people just skip through this part of the video anyway, so we're going to speedrun it. Nurse Father, definitely going into meta overall, really good for DPS, especially against bosses. And she is probably in like the top 3 of DPS still. I think she might even still be number 1. So going into meta overall for sure. This guy, Big Brother, Ricardo from the Battle Pass, I do have an entirely separate video on him, showing him off, whatever. I think he's just kind of good. He's not in the meta or anything, but he does have summons and pretty okay damage. The Vegito Synchro, really strong for damage, but you do have to max out 2 units. I do think definitely meta overall. Vegeta himself, you know, before the fusion, he's okay for full AoE damage, but he is ground only. Trunks is definitely going into meta overall. He's a very good starter unit, cheap to place down, a full AoE, hybrid, pretty good damage. So going into meta overall for sure. And also, you know, hybrid because he's hybrid. I think this guy's name is Janemba or Evil Demon. He's just kind of okay. He's a hill unit and he's alright. I don't know, that's all there is to say about him. Pretty much the same thing for Goku, but even Goku is like an okay support and auto upgrades himself. Goku Black, of course, this guy has a lot of different paths, but the best one is usually 205, so 5 bottom, 2 top. He's pretty good, definitely going into meta overall, really strong. He is also hybrid, so, you know, going into meta hybrid. And he is also a pretty good support, so going into support tier as well. Really good on Dragon Ball team still, even after the new units dropped. The synchro for Ace and the other guy, I forgot his name. Pretty good for burn damage, just raw DPS. I do think the synchro Vegeta is better if you're committed to running a synchro, but I don't know, pretty good on One Piece teams, pretty good still. Katakuri, just kind of a good unit, I don't know, he has like some supporting value, but mostly just okay damage. Kaido, just kind of okay as well. I tested him out in a different video with like follow-up attacks, whatever, in the current meta. Situational, I'd just say he's good for now. These are both just kind of support units. They have stall, so like stun, walk back, slow, all that type of stuff. I think they both have all three. Fern has slow and buffing. She's mostly a crit or SPA buffer, so really good on crit teams and just a good support. Idol, probably still the best support in the game in my opinion. Really cheap for just some crazy damage buffing or range buffing, or both. Dungeon Vu just kind of good, really falling off unfortunately, probably the worst boundless unit in the game. But he's still pretty okay, hybrid with summons, you know, pretty good damage. I would say Dante and Virtual also kind of falling off, both pretty good for their own stuff, you know, raw damage from Dante, and raw damage and like stunning from Virgil. They're both pretty okay still, but just good, not meta anymore. Big Mama, also just kind of okay on One Piece teams, like a hill unit, pretty good damage, pretty good summons, but that's about it. Garp is just kind of okay, full AoE hybrid, but not the best damage ever, so just going in good. Frieren is still very flexible, very versatile, you know, you can run her on a lot of different teams just as a like support or hybrid unit. Still really good in the current meta overall for sure, and you know, as a support going into the support tier. And I kind of forgot to put 3 of her, but she'd also be a meta hill slash hybrid, so we put her like back here in meta hill slash hybrid. Roger, still a really good early unit on One Piece teams, but that's kind of about it. Kind of falling off in current meta, but he's still pretty okay meta overall. Whitebeard, I'd also say, kind of falling off in current meta because we're shifting away from One Piece teams, but still pretty good raw damage and stunning. Sukuna, still pretty good for raw damage and also hybrid, so going into meta overall and the hybrid tier. Gojo, still a really good support for slowing down enemies and like rewinding them. Then he is also going into meta overall because he is pretty okay. Luffy, of course, is a universal unit with multiple paths. He's pretty flexible. I do think the top and middle paths are like the only ones you should really use. I don't think the bottom path is very great. Top path for DPS is really strong, definitely going into meta overall. He's very good for damage. And then he also is a pretty okay support, especially in the Gear 5 middle path because he has knockback, and he also makes enemies take a little bit more damage from all sources, so pretty good support. And he is of course hybrid, so he's going into the hill slash hybrid category. Zoro just going into meta overall because he has really good DPS on One Piece teams, that's kind of it. And then King Sailor, kind of same thing as Zoro unfortunately, even though these guys are both unrivaled and should be like okay for leader buffs, which you know Zoro is for the One Piece teams. King Sailor just kind of good for raw damage on crit teams nowadays, and he is pretty good for his element if you use him to like break fire shield or whatever. But I think that is all for the rankings, we should be done now. And here we have the final rankings of the video. Feel free to let me know what you think in the comments down below about these rankings. Again, take this all with a grain of salt, please do not be too evil with each other in the comments if you disagree with anything, because this is just my opinion at the end of the day, and this is being posted after the day of the updates, so like, you know, there's probably going to be stuff we find out in the future that would change the rankings a little bit, and that's why I end up making a tier list every update, you know the drill, just kind of keeping this updated like every week. But either way, thank you to my channel members for making the video possible, you guys are the best, thank you for watching, hope you enjoyed, hope to see you in the next one, have a great day.